All right, 20 years after the September 11th attacks, and the accused mastermind of the attacks and 4 other suspects still have not been convicted. Today, they were back in court at the U.S. Military Detention Center at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. CBS's Catherine Herridge was inside that pretrial hearing, sitting just feet from the defendants, and she joins us now. And Catherine, these men are charged with terrorism, hijacking, and nearly 3,000 counts of murder. Why were they smiling today?
Well, Nora, the men are charged with war crimes, yet they were smiling and talking freely to each other. I was sitting in the gallery where thick reinforced glass separates us from the defendants. I was about 15 yards from Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the self-described architect of the attacks. Today, he looked much older, thinner. His beard is long and gray, tinted an orangey red on the sides. I was already out of the courtroom when he apparently waved to at least one of the reporters. The other 4 defendants were deeply engaged with their attorneys throughout the process, Nora.
I just keep thinking, these hearings for the mastermind and the other ones they've dragged on for years. Is there any end in sight for the 9/11 families?
Nora, the hearing was cut short today because of a procedural issue with the judge. It's the latest in a long line of delays in this case. Most are connected to the men's detention before they arrived at Guantanamo Bay. After 9/11, they were captured and held in CIA secret prisons where they were interrogated using tactics that critics call torture, including waterboarding and sleep deprivation. Some of these 9/11 family members have died never seeing justice, Nora, in their
According to a Guardian article that was dated today, accused 9/11 plotters reportedly in talks over a deal with the U.S. government to avoid the death penalty. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and 4 co-defendants, Ammar al-Baluchi, Ramzi bin al-Shibh, Mustafa al-Hassawi, and Ridwan Ismuddin, accused of planning the 9/11 attacks, are reportedly in talks with U.S. prosecutors over a potential deal that would see them plead guilty in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. The New York Times reported that negotiations are underway for a possible plea agreement that could bring an end to what is arguably the biggest criminal case in U.S. history. The 5 defendants were first charged in 2008 with plotting or logistically supporting the terrorist attacks that led to the murder of almost 3,000 people in New York's Twin Towers, the Pentagon in Washington, and in the field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Pre-trial procedures under the so-called military commissions that were especially devised for the terror suspects held at Guantanamo Bay have been going on for more than a decade, but they have been consistently bogged down in technical and ethical disputes, foremost of which has been the long-running debate over whether the defendants can ever receive a fair trial given the torture to which they were subjected. The 5 defendants were subjected to torture techniques euphemistically referred to as enhanced interrogation techniques in secret CIA prisons or black sites. I said the 5th person was Ridwan Ismuddin. That's not true. It's Walid bin Attash, otherwise known as Khalid. Now, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was subjected to waterboarding 183 times. Ramzi bin al-Shibh, 71 times. Details of the harrowing torture inflicted on Ammar al-Baluchi by CIA interrogators at a black site known as the Salt Pit outside Kabul surfaced this week in a new court filing. An official report by the CIA's Inspector General recounted how the detainee was repeatedly slammed against a plywood wall as a form of training for new interrogation students. Negotiations over a possible guilty plea are likely to take some time, the New York Times also reported. Were a deal finally reached, it could have significant consequences, not only for the 5 defendants, but the future of Guantanamo itself. One of the key demands raised by the prisoners in a joint submission, the newspaper reported, is that they are allowed to serve the entirety of their sentences at Guantanamo, the military prison established at a U.S. naval base in Cuba after 9/11. The prisoners are allowed to pray and eat collectively at the camp, privileges that might be withheld them were they transferred to maximum security prisons in mainland USA, where solitary confinement is the norm. That, in turn, might involve the U.S. government agreeing to keep Guantanamo open for decades to come, given the life sentences without any chance of parole that would almost certainly be meted out for Mohammed and at least some of the other defendants. Joe Biden, like Barack Obama before him, have expressed a desire to close the prison, though the task so far has proved elusive. Any plea agreement would also require sensitive handling, both politically and in terms of the thousands of family members of the 9/11 victims, some of who have been vocal in demanding the death chamber for their loved ones' murders. Also in the news, coming out of Local 12, a Saudi prisoner at the Guantanamo Bay detention camp was suspected of being the 20th hijacker, Mohammad Ahmad al-Qahtani, was flown back to Saudi Arabia to a treatment facility from the U.S. base in Cuba after a review board, including military and intelligence officials, concluded he could be safely released after 20 years in custody. The 46-year-old al-Qahtani had suffered from mental illness, including schizophrenia, since childhood, according to medical examinations and records obtained by the lawyers. The U.S. dropped plans to try him after a Bush administration legal official concluded he had been tortured at Guantanamo. With his release, there are now 38 prisoners left at the detention center. He is the second released under Joe Biden. The Defense Department notified Congress of its intention to transfer al-Qahtani in February, prompting outrage from some Republicans. Lawyers for al-Qahtani obtained a federal court order in 2020 requiring a medical examination of the prisoner by an independent medical panel, which could have ordered his repatriation under Army regulations if the diagnosis of his doctors were confirmed. In August of 2001, al-Qahtani was turned away from the United States at the Orlando airport by immigration officers who were suspicious of his travel. The lead September 11th hijacker, Mohamed Atta, was going to pick him up and take part in the plot, according to previously released documents. U.S. forces later captured him in Afghanistan and sent him to Guantanamo, where he was subjected to brutal interrogations that the Pentagon legal official in charge of war crimes commissions said amounted to torture. The 38 remaining prisoners at Guantanamo include 19 who have been approved for repatriation or resettlement by the review board. There are another 7 who are eligible for review. 10 prisoners face trial by military commission, including the 5 charged with involvement in the 9/11 attacks. The remaining 2 prisoners at the base have been convicted, one of whom, former Maryland resident Majid Khan, is nearing the completion of his sentence under a plea deal. Those are the latest news regarding 9/11. Now, here are my thoughts about this. This would be a terrible outcome. Because if there is a trial, if there is no trial, that means whatever evidence or lack thereof the prosecution had will not be known to the public after 40, 50 years, when the classified materials that they do have are declassified. Now, what didn't they have? Well, we'll never know. Thanks in part to the torture methods by the CIA under authorization by John Yoo and Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, and to the numerous salt pits in Eastern Europe, in the Middle East, Egypt, Poland, Afghanistan, Iraq, where excessive uses of torture, which were called enhanced interrogation techniques, were employed by the CIA to these detainees. And at one point, there were over 800 of them at Guantanamo. By torturing Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and Omar al-Baluchi and Wali bin Attash, Ramzi bin al-Shib, and Omar al-Baluchi, no matter if they pled guilty before and during the torture, or if they were guilty, regardless, you wouldn't know. You couldn't trust their words because they would basically say anything under duress of torture. Was this on purpose? Because according to the CIA Detention and Interrogation Program Senate Select Committee, the information provided by these detainees under duress of torture was not valuable at all. Some of it was fictitious. Some of it was already known by the FBI, who had interviewed people like Abu Zubaydah, and others as well. And on top of that, the CIA has been employing torture for decades. And you would think that by 2001, that they would know that torture does not work, that it does not coerce actual information. It may sometimes, but the percentage is small. As for Mohamed al-Qahtani, the suspected 20th hijacker, which was the nickname for Zacharias Moussaoui as well. Well, when he was stopped at Orlando Immigration Services, he basically couldn't tell the officer, I think it was Jose Melendez, where he was going, who he was meeting with, the amount of money he had, which he didn't have much. Not to mention, he was being evasive with his answers. You would think there would be a lot more prepared than that. It just shows a bungling individual that would later get caught and be mercilessly tortured. If this plea deal goes through, this will be the end of 9/11 as we know it. There'll be no more new trials. There won't be any more new investigations. And everyone involved will either had died or are serving life sentences somewhere. And the only thing we'll have left are more questions than answers. And this is the best case scenario. for the CIA, for the NSA, the Israeli Mossad, the Saudi GID, and for the State Department. That they don't have to show their hand during a trial. That whatever cards that they had in their hand can be hidden from their opponent, which is the public, for as long as those cards are classified. And we'll never know what they didn't have because they won't tell us. They knew they couldn't prosecute these people, and that's why it took 20 years to basically reach out with a plea deal. Knowing full well that even if they told the truth, that their lawyers would basically dismiss it on grounds that anything they said was made under duress of torture. How can you prosecute a victim of torture using his own words against him when it was made under duress? It would mean that the 5 suspects of 9/11 would have to walk free if they were in a federal court. But since they're classified as enemy combatants and that they're in a military tribunal, well, they could be held indefinitely. Thanks to White House legal counsel David Addington and John Yoo, who rewrote what determines an enemy combatant and what type of laws they are afforded or lack thereof. In this case, they're afforded no rights, even under the Geneva Conventions. The White House lawyers sidestepped it, and they left it up to the State Department, not the Pentagon, not the Department of Justice, but the State Department to determine who is an enemy combatant. A dangerous precedent, if you ask me. And if this deal is finalized, much like every other human event in history, we will be left with more questions than answers.